The story I'm going to tell today is not just about war, battles, or destruction. It's about something stronger than any bomb, more resilient than any army, and more lasting than any conflict. Love. In the midst of chaos, among rubble and gunfire, two souls found each other and clung to a feeling that, no matter how much it was tested by time and pain, never ceased to exist. This is not a simple love story. It's not a fairy tale where a happy ending is guaranteed. It is a narrative about hope that blooms in the darkest places, about promises made under the sound of sirens, and about oaths of love that, even with all the strength of a passionate heart, could not overcome destiny. Our couple did not have the luxury of tranquility. They loved each other in times of war, when every moment could be their last, and when every goodbye could mean a final goodbye. They built dreams on the rubble of destruction and made plans for a future that might never come. Still, they moved forward, because when everything around them seemed to be falling apart, love was the only certainty they had. Imagine a young soldier leaving for a battle from which he may never return, carrying with him only a crumpled photo and the scent of his beloved's perfume on his uniform. Imagine a woman waiting for news that might never arrive, writing letters that might never be read. Time and war separated them, but the feeling they carried inside kept them together. But can love resist anything? Can he withstand hunger, fear, explosions, and goodbyes? What if, after surviving all this, fate still has other plans? This is the story of two hearts that fought to be together, but in the end, discovered that love does not always win the cruelest war of all, the war against one's own destiny. Love appears in the most unlikely moments, in the most unexpected places. For Viktor and Anna, he was born in a time where everything was uncertain, where tomorrow was not guaranteed, and where each day could be the last. Their first date was not at a luxurious ball, nor under the moonlight on a peaceful night. It was among ruins, in a city devastated by war, where fear reigned and hope was a rare luxury. The city of Kiev, 1941. The sky was grey, thick with smoke and debris. The war had arrived mercilessly, transforming busy streets into corridors of silence and despair. The sound of bombings still echoed among the destroyed buildings, and the dust mixed with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Viktor, he was a young soldier, just 22 years old, sent to fight on the front line. His face already bore the marks of war, not physical scars, but a look that had aged before its time, hardened by the horror of battles. He was walking through the rubble, looking for survivors, when he first saw her. Anna, she was kneeling beside her mother's body, holding her lifeless hands, trying to find a last bit of warmth. His eyes were red with tears, and his hair, once golden like wheat, was dirty with dust and soot. She didn't notice when Viktor approached for her. The world had stopped there. In that moment of irreparable loss, Viktor hesitated. Like a soldier, he had learned to harden his heart, not to get attached, not to feel, but something about the scene stopped him. Anna's pain felt so intense, so real, that he couldn't ignore it. "You need to get out of here," he said, his voice hoarse, trying not to sound affected. She looked up. For the first time, their eyes met. He saw there a devastated soul, but also something he hadn't expected, an unbreakable strength, a silent determination. "Where would I go?" His voice was almost a whisper. "I have no one else." Viktor's heart sank. He knew that feeling well. How many friends had he already lost? How many times had he felt that there was no longer any reason to continue? But there, in front of her, he realized that perhaps there was still something to fight for. "I'll help you," he said, without thinking twice. And in that moment, without them, knowing their destinies became intertwined forever. The days that followed were a constant challenge. Viktor took Anna to a makeshift shelter, where injured civilians were trying to survive. He used his few resources to get food for her and, whenever possible, he stayed by her side, trying to protect her from the worst. At first, Anna was in shock. The pain of loss was suffocating. But little by little, Viktor's presence brought a small ray of light into his darkness. He said little about himself, but his care said it all. One night, while they were hiding in a damp basement, trying to escape the bombings, Anna broke the silence. "Do you have someone waiting for you at home?" Viktor sighed. "No more. My parents died when I was 10 years old. I grew up with an uncle who put me in the army, before I could even decide what I wanted to do with my life." She looked at him, seeing past the uniform and weapons. Here was a man who had also lost everything, who was also trying to find purpose in the midst of destruction. And you? He asked. She swallowed hard. My parents were all I had. Now only memories remain. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was a moment of mutual understanding. They didn't need words to understand each other's pain. From that moment on, something changed between them. Anna began to see in Viktor not just a soldier, but a man with a heart that, despite being hardened by war, still knew how to feel. And Viktor came to see in Anna not just a survivor, but a woman whose resilience inspired him. They began to depend on each other. When Viktor went on risky missions, Anna waited anxiously for his return. When he came back, her look was the first thing he looked for. Until, one day, Viktor returned from the battlefield with a deep cut on his arm. Anna, without hesitation, tore off a piece of her own clothing to stop the blood. "You don't have to do this," he said, trying to hide the pain. She looked him in the eyes. "I need it. Yes, because you did the same for me when I had no one else." It was at that moment that Viktor realized he was no longer alone. The love between Viktor and Anna was not born from a conventional romance. There were no candlelit dinners, no serenades. Their love grew between pain and danger, between screams of suffering and explosions on the horizon. But perhaps, precisely for that reason, it was so strong, they didn't know what the future held. War was uncertain, and each new day was a gift. But at that moment, as they looked at each other in the makeshift shelter, they knew they had found something that not even war could destroy. They still didn't know that fate, cruel and relentless, was already writing a final chapter to this story. But that was something that only time would reveal. The love that began to be born between Viktor and Anna. She was like a flower growing among the rubble, fragile, delicate, but determined to survive. However, the war gave no respite, and each day brought new challenges. They weren't in a fairy tale. They were in a scenario of death and destruction, where time was a merciless enemy and hope had to fight against brutal reality. The days in the makeshift shelter were hard. The cold punished bodies already weakened by hunger, and the scarcity of food made each meal a matter of life and death. Viktor, as a soldier, had access to small rations, but it wasn't enough for everyone. He began sharing what little he had with Anna, ignoring his own exhaustion and hunger to ensure she stayed alive. Anna, in turn, didn't want to be a burden. Even though she was weakened by the loss of her mother and the suffering of the war, she forced herself to help in any way she could. I sewed other refugees' torn clothes, cared for the injured, and tried to bring a bit of normalcy to that shattered world. One night, as Viktor cleaned his rifle in the corner of the shelter, she sat down next to him. "You don't have to take care of me like that," she said, her voice soft but determined. He looked up, surprised. "What do you mean by that? You have your own problems. You can't worry about me all the time." Viktor sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Anna, I do this because I want to, not because I need to." She was silent for a moment, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. He didn't need to say anything else. This was more than gratitude or obligation. He truly cared. But the war left no time for tender moments. One morning, a group of enemy soldiers invaded the neighborhood where they were hiding. The thunder of footsteps echoed through the empty streets, and screams could be heard in the distance. Viktor knew immediately that they needed to escape. He grabbed Anna's hand and quickly pulled her out of the shelter. "We need to get out of here, now." She ran beside him, her heart racing, fear throbbing in every cell of her body. The sound of gunfire pierced the air, and distant explosions shook the ground. They walked through narrow alleys, trying to escape the enemy's sight, until Viktor pulled her into an abandoned house. They were both panting, pressed against the wall, trying to catch their breath. Viktor looked at her and saw the terror in her eyes. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, squeezing her hand. She nodded but didn't respond. I trusted him, but did I trust fate? Hours later, when everything seemed calmer, Viktor made a difficult decision. "I need to get back to base. If we stay together, it will be more dangerous. You should go to another shelter, further away." Anna's eyes widened. "No, I won't leave you. Anna, please." She held him by the shoulders, desperation clear in her voice. "I'm not going to lose anyone else." Viktor, he felt his heart tighten. I understood what she felt. He also didn't want to separate, but the reality of war gave them no choice. "I promise I'll come back to you." He gently cupped her face. No matter what happens, she tried to hold back the tears, but one fell silently down her face. promise me you'll come back in one piece." He smiled slightly, even though he knew this was a difficult promise to keep. "I promise." And then, for the first time, he kissed her. It wasn't a hasty or desperate kiss. It was a kiss that carried unspoken promises, unspoken fears, and a love that was just beginning. But when they pulled away, Viktor knew that this could be the last kiss. He left, and Anna remained behind, her heart heavy. With uncertainty, the days passed like an eternity for Anna. With each explosion, with each news of battles being fought, she feared the worst. Was Viktor still alive? Had the war already taken him away from her? She spent sleepless nights, writing letters that might never be read. "Dear Viktor, where are you now? Are you cold? Are you hungry? Are you alive?" She kept each letter under her makeshift pillow, as if she could somehow keep a piece of him there with her. But time continued, relentlessly, and Viktor did not return. Until, one day, devastating news reached the shelter where Anna was hiding. An entire platoon was wiped out at the front. No survivors. His knees gave out. The world spun around him. Pain ripped through her chest in a way she never imagined possible. Viktor couldn't be dead. He promised to return. But deep down, she knew that promises don't always win over destiny. Anna didn't cry. Not at that moment. She just stood there, staring. The void. His heart refused to accept it. His body was shaking, but not from the cold. It was fear, scared of going on without him. But then, something inside her lit up. What if he's alive? What if it's just a mistake? She needed to know. I needed to be sure. And so Anna made her decision. She would leave. It would go to where Viktor should be, even if it meant facing war alone. She wouldn't give up on him. Fate could even try to separate them, but Anna wouldn't let the war steal her love without fighting too. The end. War does not forgive. She doesn't care about promises made under the moonlight, about vows of love whispered in the midst of fear. It doesn't distinguish between who deserves to live and who doesn't. It only takes, destroys, and leaves deep scars on those who dare to dream in times of despair. To Anna, the war was not just a distant conflict. She had ripped away her parents, her certainties, and now she was about to steal her last hope, Viktor. But she wouldn't let that happen without a fight. Anna decided to leave, determined to find Viktor. It didn't matter what it took. If he was alive, she would bring him back. If he was dead, at least she could say goodbye. She left the shelter just before dawn, with nothing but a worn coat and a small bag containing a loaf of bread and a letter she never got the chance to give him. Her fate, the battlefield. But a woman alone, in the middle of war, was an easy target. She would need to be cautious. He walked hiding in the shadows, avoiding main roads and avoiding any suspicious movement. Fear tried to dominate her, but her love for Viktor kept her going. After days of wandering, facing hunger and cold, he found a group of wounded soldiers in a small abandoned hut. Among them, a man with a dirty uniform and a tired look observed her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, frowning. Anna hesitated. "I couldn't trust anyone. I'm looking for a soldier," he said firmly. Viktor Petrov, the man, exchanged glances with the other. Soldiers. Something in his expression made Anna's heart freeze. "You shouldn't be here," he said, looking away. "Is he alive?" Her voice trailed off. "Please tell me." The soldier sighed. "His platoon was attacked. Most died, but I heard that some were captured." Anna's heart skipped a beat. If Viktor was alive, he was in enemy hands. In a prison camp a few miles away, Viktor was breathing heavily. His body was bruised, covered in bruises. He could barely move, but his mind was alert. The only thought that kept him alive was Anna. He had promised to return to her. He needed return to her. With each day in that field, hope grew fainter. He saw other soldiers succumb, one by one, but he refused to give up. Then, one freezing night, he heard a whisper coming from outside the fence. "Viktor." He thought he was hallucinating, but when he turned his face, his eyes met something he never expected to see. She was there, hidden in the darkness, holding on to the chain-link fence as if her life depended on it. "My God," Viktor murmured, his voice breaking. She covered her mouth to keep from sobbing. He was bruised, weak, unrecognizable, but he was alive. "I'll get you out of here," she promised. He smiled slightly, even though he knew it was almost impossible. "You were always stubborn." The chance of escaping was slim, but Anna wouldn't back down. For days, she watched the movement of the guards, studying every detail. "Viktor," in turn, tried to hide his best strength, hope. If they found out he still believed in something, they would make a point of breaking it. On the planned night, with the help of a deserter soldier that Anna had convinced to help them, Viktor managed to escape. They ran into the woods, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Anna pulled Viktor by the arm, ignoring her own fear. They couldn't be caught. Not now. After hours of running, they fell exhausted among the trees. The shooting stopped. The silence of the forest enveloped them. Anna turned to Viktor, panting. "Are you well?" He cupped her face with shaking hands. "I am now." And he kissed her, as if time had stopped, as if the world around him wasn't at war. But fate had not yet played its last card. On the way to freedom, one last shot rang out. Anna felt the impact before she even heard the sound. Viktor caught her before she fell. Blood stained her shirt, warm against her cold night skin. "No, no, Anna," he whispered, holding her in his arms. She smiled weakly, her eyes shining with something between love and goodbye. "You promised to come back to me," she murmured. Viktor held her hand against his chest, as if he could transfer his own life into her. "And I came back." Anna tried to say something more, but her strength was gone. The war may have spared Viktor for a time, but in the end, it robbed him of what he loved most. Anna closed her eyes in the arms of the man she loved so much. And Viktor, for the first time since the war began, cried. If this story is holding you back as much as the war held Viktor and Anna, leave a like to support our work. This helps us bring you more exciting stories like this. And if you are not yet registered, join us on this journey and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters. Now, let's continue. Because before their separation, Viktor and Anna made promises that not even war could erase. The love of Viktor and Anna had withstood so many challenges. He survived the cold, hunger, bombings, and even the brutality of a prison camp. But war was never a fair enemy, always found a way to steal what people loved most. After the desperate escape, Anna was seriously injured. Viktor held her in his arms, begging her to stay awake. The warm blood staining his shirt was a cruel reminder that they were racing against time. Viktor, ignoring his own exhaustion, carried Anna through the forest until he found an abandoned cabin. With shaking hands, he tore off a piece of his uniform and pressed it against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You won't leave me, Anna," he murmured, his eyes teary. "You promised we would be together." Anna smiled weakly, trying to hide the pain. "I'm not going anywhere. While you're here," he held her hand, his heart beating wildly. "I'll find help. You just need to hold on a little longer." She squeezed his fingers with what little strength she had left. "Viktor, if something happens to me, promise you will survive." He shook his head, his eyes burning. "Don't talk like that. You will live. Let's get out of here together. Promise, Viktor." Her voice, although weak, carried an undeniable urgency. The soldier pursed his lips. He didn't want to make that promise. "I didn't want to accept the possibility of a world without Anna, but she needed to hear this." "I promise," he said, feeling the bitter taste of the words. Anna smiled slightly and promised something else. "Whatever you want." She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. "Don't let war erase who you are." Viktor closed his eyes for a moment. He knew what she meant. War-hardened men turned dreams into ashes and hopes into emptiness. He had seen this happen to so many companions. And now, Anna was asking him to resist this. He swallowed and nodded. "I promise." Her gaze began to lose focus. "Viktor, Anna, stay with me." He pressed his hand against her wound, trying to keep her conscious. But Anna's eyes began to close. "I will always love you." His voice was just a whisper. Viktor felt panic take over his chest. "Anna, don't close your eyes." But she no longer listened to him. Viktor's heart almost stopped. He cupped her face, feeling the world crumble around him. So, in a fit of desperation, he did the only thing he could do. He male. With Anna in his arms, Viktor walked through the forest, ignoring the pain in his muscles and the crushing fatigue. He knew there was a village nearby. If he could get there in time, he could save her. He didn't know how many minutes or hours had passed. All that mattered was keeping Anna alive. Finally, he saw a house with lights on. With his lungs burning, he knocked on the door. An elderly woman opened it, her eyes wide as she saw the bloodied soldier holding an unconscious young woman. "Please," Viktor begged, his voice breaking. "She needs help." The woman hesitated for a second, but then nodded and led them inside. Viktor watched helplessly as Anna was laid on a makeshift bed, and her wounds were treated. The only thing he could do now was wait. The days passed in a blur. Anna was alive, but weak. Viktor didn't leave her side for even a moment. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt such relief that he almost collapsed. "You came back to me," Anna whispered. He held your hand, his eyes teary. "I'll never leave you again." She smiled slightly. "You promised you would survive." He nodded. "And you promised you wouldn't leave me." Anna took a deep breath, squeezing his hand a little tighter. "Then, I guess we'll have to keep our promises together." And for the first time in a long time, Viktor believed that perhaps fate had not won yet. The war did not allow rest. No matter how much Viktor and Anna longed for a moment of peace, conflict continued to rage around them like an uncontrollable storm. Anna was still recovering from her injury, but time was a luxury they didn't have. The enemy was advancing, destroying everything in its path. Every day, new soldiers passed through the village in search of deserters and traitors. They needed to escape, but where? In the cabin where they were hiding, Viktor watched Anna sleep. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, and he knew she was still too weak for a long trip. But staying there meant certain death. When Anna woke up, she found Viktor sitting next to her, looking distant. "What it was?" she asked, her voice still hoarse. He sighed, turning to her. "We need to leave, Anna. They are getting closer and closer." She nodded slowly, but Viktor saw the concern in her eyes. "I can walk," she said, trying to get up. He quickly helped her, holding her steady. "We don't need to go fast, but we need to go." Anna took a deep breath. She knew Viktor was right. The two set out at dusk, moving slowly along the destroyed roads. Viktor helped Anna whenever necessary, but each step was a fight against fatigue and pain. The surrounding landscape was heartbreaking. Houses burned, bodies left behind, trees destroyed by the impact of bombs. It was a cruel reminder that the world they knew was gone. "Where are we going?" Anna asked, trying to ignore the cold biting her skin. "To the west," Viktor pointed to the horizon. "There are rumors that some cities have not yet been taken. We can find a safe place." Anna held his hand tighter. "As long as you're with me, anywhere is safe." He looked at her, and for a moment, the war disappeared. But the illusion was short-lived. In the middle of the night, the sound of engines echoed across the road. Viktor froze. He pulled Anna behind a crumbling wall and motioned for her to be silent. On the other side, a group of soldiers patrolled the area, their voices filled with brutality. They searched houses, looking for deserters. If they were found, there would be no mercy. Anna held her breath, feeling her heart hammer against her chest. Viktor pulled her hand slowly, guiding her to the opposite side of the road, moving as silently as possible. Every second felt like an eternity. But then, a noise. The sound of wood breaking. A small piece of debris fell to the ground as a weak Anna accidentally bumped into a pile of rubble. The soldiers immediately turned around. "Who's there?" Viktor grabbed Anna and mail. Shots began to echo behind them. Viktor's heart beat faster than ever as he pulled Anna by the hand, weaving through the wreckage. But she was still weak, and he knew they couldn't continue like this for long. Then he saw an abandoned barn. "There," he whispered, pulling Anna inside. They hid behind bales of hay, trying to silence their breathing as the soldiers approached. Anna held Viktor's hand tightly. The soldiers' footsteps echoed inside the barn. They were lost, until a new sound cut through the night. Explosions in the distance. The soldiers stopped, exchanging glances. "We need to go back to base," one of them ordered. Then, as if fate had granted them a miracle, the soldiers they left. Viktor let out a long sigh. Closing his eyes for a moment, they had escaped, barely. When everything was silent, Viktor looked at Anna. "Are you well?" She nodded, but he saw tears shining in her eyes. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." His voice was a whisper. Viktor swallowed. He wanted to say that everything would be okay. I wanted to promise that they were close to a happy ending, but he couldn't lie to her. Instead, he gently cupped her face and told her the only truth he knew. "We will continue, together." Anna closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Together, and there, amid fear and uncertainty, their love was the only thing that the war had not yet managed to destroy. But would fate let this last time pass in a blur? To Viktor and Anna, each day was a new battle, not only against the war around them, but also against the uncertainty of a future that seemed increasingly distant. After narrowly escaping the enemy patrol, they found shelter in a devastated village, hiding in the basement of an abandoned house. The cold was intense, and the fear of being discovered never left them. But there was something even worse than fear: the silence. War separated people in every possible way. Viktor and Anna had survived everything so far, but they were completely isolated. They didn't know who else was alive, if the war was nearing an end, or if there would still be a home to return to. So, Viktor made a decision. They needed to send a message. "We need to find someone who can help us," Viktor said, as Anna warmed herself with a thin blanket. "Help? How?" she asked, her voice weak. "If we can send a message, maybe we can find out what's going on out there. We can find a safe place, or at least know that the war is nearing an end." Anna nodded, but her gaze was distant. "Who would we send this message to? Viktor? Who is still alive to receive it?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't have an answer. The war had taken everything from them. But still, he needed to try." The next day, Viktor left the house, looking for any sign of life. Anna wanted to go with him, but he insisted that she rest. The village looked like an open tomb. The streets were covered in debris, broken windows, abandoned stores. A strong smell of smoke hung in the air, a remnant of recent fires. Viktor walked cautiously, paying attention to any movement. He knew that at any moment he could be seen and killed. It was then that he found a telegraph pole. The wire was cut, but not completely destroyed. If he could get to the resistance base, perhaps he could send a message. He just needed to find someone who knew how to operate the radio. Following his instinct, Viktor hid until nightfall, and after a few hours walking through the deserted streets, he saw a faint light coming from the basement of an old grocery store. He approached cautiously and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" a male voice echoed. "A soldier. Looking for information," Viktor replied, keeping his hand close to the gun. The door opened just a crack, and a thin, suspicious face appeared in the darkness. "You're not one of them," muttered the man. "No, but I need your help." The man hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and pulled Viktor inside. The basement was dark, with piles of paper and wires scattered across the floor. In the corner, an old radio rested on a makeshift table. "Do you know how to operate this?" Viktor asked. The man nodded slowly. "When we still had an organized command, I was responsible for transmissions, but now everything has fallen apart. Can you try sending a message?" The man sighed. For whom Viktor didn't know. He just wanted for someone to hear. Anyone, whoever is still on the other side. The man hesitated, but then began turning the knobs on the radio, adjusting the frequencies. The device hissed, and for a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, a faint voice emerged. "This is the resistance. Who's listening?" Viktor's heart skipped a beat. "This is Viktor Petrov. I need information and help." The transmission was static for a few seconds, and then the voice returned. "The city is surrounded. The enemy is advancing. If you want to survive, you must leave now." Viktor's breathing became heavy. "Where should we go?" The answer came quickly. "There's a train leaving at dawn tomorrow. If you can get to the station before then, you'll have a chance." The radio chirped and then was silent. Contact was lost. But Viktor had something he didn't have before: a plan. He returned to Anna as quickly as he could, entering the house panting. She was scared to see him so agitated. "What happened?" He held her face in his hands. "We need to go. There's a train leaving tomorrow. This may be our only chance." Anna's eyes widened. "A train? Where to?" "Away from here. Away from the war." Anna was silent for a moment. They had already escaped so many times. They had already fought against death countless times, but would fate finally give them a chance? She held Viktor's hand and nodded. "Then let's go." That night, they didn't sleep. For the first time, they had a way out. But the war had not yet given its last word. And when the sun rose, Viktor and Anna would face the biggest challenge of their lives. The night was long. Viktor and Anna couldn't sleep, as every second brought them closer to a decisive moment. The promise of a train leaving at dawn was his only hope of escaping the war and starting over in a place where love didn't have to fight death every moment. But the way there would be dangerous. The station was a few kilometers away and was under enemy surveillance. Getting there would be a silent battle, a race against time and against the cruel fate that always seemed determined to separate them. It was still dark when Viktor and Anna left the shelter. The city around them looked like a stone cemetery, a monument to the lives the war had destroyed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their cautious footsteps. "Viktor," Anna whispered, holding his hand tightly. "If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," he cut in, without looking back. "But what if it happens?" He stopped for a moment, turning to her. His eyes were tired but steady. "So we fought together." Anna nodded, squeezing his hand even tighter. They continued forward, moving through the shadows of the ruins. Time was against them. The train would leave at dawn, and if they weren't there in time, they would lose their only chance of escape. But the war had not yet finished its hunt. When they were just a few blocks from the station, the unmistakable sound of marching boots echoed through the destroyed streets. Viktor pulled Anna behind a wall. "Stay down," he murmured. A group of enemy soldiers patrolled the area. Their rifles were ready, their eyes alert for any suspicious movement. They were blocking the only street leading to the station. "And now," Anna whispered, panic visible in her eyes. Viktor quickly analyzed the situation. They had two options: wait and risk missing the train, try to sneak across and run the risk of being caught. Time was running out, so Viktor made a decision. "Let's go behind the buildings. There is a narrow alley that will take us straight to the station." Anna nodded and, without hesitation, followed Viktor as they moved silently through the rubble. But fate, always cruel, prepared yet another trap. One of the soldiers turned abruptly and noticed movement. "Hey, who's there?" The other soldiers immediately turned around, raising their weapons. "Run!" Viktor shouted, pulling Anna by the hand. The shots started. Adrenaline took over their bodies as they ran through the narrow alley, projectiles hitting the surrounding walls. The train was already at the station. They needed to get to him. The station was in sight. The train whistle sounded like a promise of freedom. But the soldiers were approaching. Viktor and Anna ran as fast as they could, their hearts hammering in their chests. The train started to move slowly. They needed to jump. "Come on, Anna," Viktor shouted, holding his hand. She looked at the moving train, then at Viktor. And then, a shot. Anna staggered. Horror filled Viktor's eyes as he watched the blood run down her side. "No," he shouted, catching her before she fell. The soldiers were arriving. He didn't have time. Anna looked at him, her eyes shining with something between pain and acceptance. "Wow, Viktor, not without you." The train was moving away. His only chance was slipping away before his eyes. Anna cupped his face with her shaking hands. "You promised you would survive." Viktor's eyes were full of tears. He didn't want to go. He couldn't leave her behind. But she was seriously injured. If they stayed there, they would both die. Anna smiled weakly. "Go, for both of us." Viktor's heart broke, but he knew that was the only choice. With one last look full of love and despair, he walked away. And then, with a cry of pain, Viktor jumped into the moving carriage. As the train pulled away, Viktor saw Anna lying in the rubble, the soldiers approaching her. He shouted his name, but the noise of the train drowned out his voice. The last thing he saw was Anna smiling at him, as if to say, "You kept your promise." Then, she disappeared over the horizon, and Viktor felt his world fall apart. The war had won once again. The train continued its course, but stopped Viktor. Time seemed to have stopped. He didn't feel the cold wind cutting into his skin. He didn't hear the noise of the wheels against the tracks, nor the murmurs of the few souls who, like him, had managed to board. All that was left in his mind was the image of Anna, lying among the rubble, her smile weak, and the last thing she said to him. "You promised you would survive." But what did it mean to survive without her? He clenched his fists, feeling the pain that came not just from the cuts and wounds on his body, but from the emptiness that filled his chest. Was Anna alive? This question echoed in his mind over and over again. He forced himself to believe that yes, that somehow she had resisted. But the war was not merciful, and deep down, Viktor knew he might never see her again. The journey without destination, the hours dragged by inside that train. Nobody said much. Everyone there carried their own scars from the war. Everyone had lost someone. An elderly woman sitting in the corner held a ring in her trembling hands, looking at it as if trying to relive a happy memory. A young soldier, ragged, held a crumpled piece of letter, read so many times that it was already faded. The war had made them equal. They were all survivors of something they never asked to face. Viktor looked at his hands covered in dried blood and soot. His breathing was heavy, and he felt the weight of fatigue on his shoulders. He wondered if it still made sense to continue. It was then that, as he reached into his coat pocket, he felt something soft between his fingers. He pulled the object out and felt his heart stop for a second. It was a folded piece of paper, Anna's letter. He remembered when she wrote, on the cold nights in the shelter, when they still had hope for a future together. For some reason, he never had the courage to read it. But now, there, alone on that train, with his heart shattered, he unfolded the paper and began to read. "Victor, if you ever read this letter, I hope it will be in times of peace. I hope we are together, perhaps laughing about the past, living a simple and happy life, as we always dreamed of. But if that is not the case, I want you to know that I have never regretted anything. Not one step, not one decision, not one moment we spent together. War may have destroyed many things, but it can never erase how we feel about each other. It can never steal the promises we made to each other. If we ever lose each other, I want you to keep going. I want you to find a future for yourself. Because if I can't be by your side, I want to at least know that you lived for both of us. And if life allows, I know we will meet again, whether in this life or another. With all my love, Anna." Viktor clutched the paper to his chest, his eyes burning with tears he couldn't hold back. She knew, somehow, Anna always knew that fate could separate them, but still, she chose to love him. The train advanced towards the unknown. Viktor looked up at the sky, at the horizon in front of him. Anna asked him to live, and, as much as it hurt, he knew he needed to keep that promise. He would survive, not for him, but for her, and for all the moments that the war tried to steal. The train continued its way away from the horror of war, but within Viktor, the chaos continued. Every kilometer away from the destroyed city was like a blade cutting into his soul. He was gone, but at what cost? Anna was back there, hurt, vulnerable, and he didn't know what had happened to her. The weight of the promise he had made burned inside him. Survive. But surviving without her didn't feel like life, just existence. As the tracks shook beneath the cars, Viktor looked out the train's small window, his heart sinking. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, staining the sky with shades of gold and crimson. It was ironic. The day was born beautiful, while inside it, everything was falling apart. The surrounding passengers were silent, immersed in their own ghosts. "Where is this train going?" Viktor asked an elderly man next to him. The man looked at him, his eyes sunken and tired. "Away from the war, that's what they say. But wherever we go, we'll carry the war within us." Viktor nodded, feeling the weight of those words. The train continued its course, but his mind remained stuck in the past. At the exact moment Anna let go of his hand, in the last look they exchanged, and then came a thought that hit him like a punch in the gut. What if Anna was still alive? What if she had survived? He had run away because it was the only way to fulfill the promise she asked him to do. But what if he had made a mistake? What if she was waiting for him? Viktor felt his entire body stiffen. What were you doing there? He couldn't just continue his journey without knowing. I couldn't leave her to uncertainty. If Anna was still alive, he needed to find her. If she was dead, then he needed to at least bury his love with dignity. But going back meant extreme risk. The city was dominated. The soldiers chasing them would still be there. Going back was almost suicidal. But the idea of moving on without her, that was certain death. Viktor made his decision. He would continue the journey. He would leave Anna behind. His heart hammered in his chest as he got up from the bench and walked to the carriage door. The train was still moving, but was slowing down as it approached a fork. He looked back one last time. All the passengers were focused on their own destinations, not noticing that he was about to abandon that fragile refuge. If I die, at least I die trying. With one last breath, Viktor jumped. The impact was brutal. His body rolled across the ground covered in snow and debris, his head throbbing in pain. But he was alive, and now he would come back for Anna. Every step was a challenge. The walk to town seemed longer than the escape. He avoided main roads, moving in the shadows with the instinct of a hunter. He could not be seen. His heart sank at each corpse he encountered on his way. What if Anna was among them? But then, something happened. In the middle of the ruins, Viktor heard a faint sound, a murmur. He approached slowly, his heart racing. And then, among the rubble of a fallen wall, he saw her, Anna, wounded, but alive. His eyes were closed, and his pale face seemed to have been carved by pain itself. But when Viktor knelt beside her and held her hand, her eyes opened. Weak but alive, she recognized him immediately. Viktor, her voice was shaky, as if she didn't believe he was there. He felt tears burn his eyes. "I came back to you." Anna's lips trembled, and a small smile appeared there, weak but real. She tried to lift her hand to touch his face, but she didn't have the strength. "I knew," she whispered. Viktor held his face gently, ignoring the pain, the fear, the war around him. Nothing else mattered. He found her, but the war was not over yet. And now, he would need to fight harder than ever to get her out of there. The war seemed to have done everything it could to separate them, but there they were, Viktor and Anna, together again. However, time was not on their side. Anna was seriously injured. His body was cold, his lips were pale, and the strength to keep his eyes open seemed to be running out with every second. But now, I needed to save her. "Anna, hang in there. I'm going to get you out of here," Viktor said, holding her face with shaking hands. She tried to smile, but it was a visible effort. "You always say that," he whispered, his voice weak. Viktor's heart sank. He took her in his arms, feeling her light, fragile weight against his chest. The world around him was in ruins, but he didn't care. I wouldn't let the war win. But where to go? The city was devastated, and every corner could hide enemy soldiers. He couldn't just run without a plan, so he made the only decision possible. He would return to the basement of the grocery store where he had met the radio operator. If anyone could help them, it would be him. Carrying Anna in his arms, Viktor moved through the destroyed streets, feeling the weight of fatigue pressing down on his shoulders. Every step was a battle against fear. Anna was so weak he could barely feel her breathing against his chest. "Stay with me, Anna," he murmured every minute, like a mantra. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them. The cold bit his skin, the smell of gunpowder and destruction permeated the air. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was reach the destination before it was too late. And then, when his muscles were screaming with exhaustion, he finally saw the grocery store. Viktor knocked hard on the basement door, his heart hammering in his chest. "Open, please, it's urgent." For a moment, everything was silent. Then the door opened slightly, and the radio operator, a thin-faced man with tired eyes, appeared. "You again," he murmured, surprised to see Viktor standing there. Then, he saw Anna in his arms. "For God's sake, what happened to her? She needs help now." The man looked around, checking if they were being followed, and then motioned for them to enter. Viktor gently placed Anna on the ground, while the man grabbed a makeshift first aid kit. "She lost a lot of blood, but if we can stop the wound, maybe there's still time." Viktor clenched his fists. Perhaps. That word echoed in his mind like a hammer, because he knew that in times of war, perhaps meant very little. As the operator worked to stabilize Anna, Viktor felt a new wave of despair rising within him. What would happen now? Even if he managed to keep her alive for now, where would they go? The city was doomed. The enemy was everywhere. And then, as if fate were mocking him, the answer came over the radio. The operator turned the dials, and a weak transmission, full of noise and static, came into the air. "Last evacuation, leaving at dawn. Whoever can reach the rendezvous point will have a chance." Viktor and the operator exchanged glances. "Evacuation? Where to?" The man adjusted the buttons, trying to improve the signal. "West. Last train. There won't be another chance." Viktor felt his heart accelerate. One last train, one last chance. But Anna was too weak to walk. What if I couldn't resist the path? Time was against them. Viktor looked at Anna, lying there, so fragile. If they stayed, she would die. But if they broke, the risk would be enormous. "You must decide now, soldier," the operator said, his voice tense. Viktor swallowed, and then he knelt down beside Anna and held her hand. Her eyes opened slightly, fixing on him. "We have a chance to get out of here, but we need to leave now." Anna blinked slowly, as if processing the words. "Do you think I can do it?" Viktor felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say Sim. He wanted to promise that everything would be okay. But he knew that I couldn't lie to her, so he said the only thing that was true. "If you fall, I will carry you. If you can't walk, I won't leave you behind." Anna smiled weakly. "So let's go." Viktor lifted Anna into his arms again and left the basement, feeling adrenaline taking over his body. They had one last chance, one last fight for life. The train was waiting for them, more to war. The war was not yet over, and before dawn, Viktor and Anna would face the most difficult time of their lives. The road to the station seemed endless. Viktor carried Anna in his arms, his heart hammering in his chest with each step. The darkness of dawn enveloped them, and the silence was broken only by the sound of the debris beneath their feet and the distant echo of the explosions that still hit the city. Time was running out. The last train would leave at dawn, and they needed to get to him. Every move was a battle. Anna, weakened by the wound, tried to remain conscious, but the fever and blood loss weakened her. Viktor, his voice was shaky. "You, let me go if you need to." He stopped, his eyes locking with hers. "Not in 1,000 years, Anna." She tried to smile, but she didn't have the strength. Viktor clenched his jaw. He would not allow the war to rob him of it. The horizon was beginning to lighten when they saw the station. There it was, the train. But between them and freedom, there was something Viktor feared. They were patrolling the area, blocking the way to the carriages. Fate wouldn't make it easy. Viktor looked at Anna, then at the soldiers. There was no time to plan. They had two options: wait and risk missing the train, run and fight, even if it meant dying trying. He knelt beside Anna, holding her hand. "When I say so, you run to that car. Understand, Viktor?" she murmured. "Don't ask me for that." He smiled, trying to hide the fear in his eyes. "I need you to trust me." Anna nodded slowly. Viktor took a deep breath, and then he ran to the opposite side of the station. The sacrifice of one love. The soldiers heard the noise and turned around immediately. "There, catch him." Shots rang out in the station as Viktor ran, dodging the projectiles. His heart was beating out of control, but he didn't look back, because he knew what he was doing. He was distracting them, giving time for Anna to escape. With one last glance at the platform, he saw his beloved moving, crawling into the open carriage. She did it, but then a bullet pierced his shoulder. Viktor fell to his knees, pain burning like fire inside him. The soldiers surrounded him. He knew it was the end, but at least Anna was safe. He closed his eyes, and then he heard the sweetest sound he had ever heard, the train whistle. The train was leaving. Anna was safe. He smiled, even as darkness took over his vision. Inside the train, Anna tried to get up, but she had no strength. "Viktor," his voice was a whisper. She knew. "Did you know? I wasn't with her. He had been left behind." She tried to scream, tried to run out of the carriage, but hands held her back. "No," his voice broke. "He promised. He said he would never leave me." But the train continued its course, leaving the devastated city behind, and the man she loved. Anna fell to the floor of the carriage, her face bathed in tears. She had survived, but at what cost? Viktor was taken away by the soldiers, his body weak and bloody. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know what their destination would be. But deep down, it didn't matter. Why, Anna was alive, and somehow, that was enough. As the pain consumed him, he whispered the last words. He had the strength to say, "I kept my promise." And then, the world went dark. War always takes a toll. For some, it is life. For others, it is the soul. Viktor, I didn't know which of the two would lose first. He was weak. His body ached. The fever burned his skin, and the wound on his shoulder was bleeding uncontrollably. But nothing hurt more than the absence of Anna. She was on the train. She was alive. And him, he was a prisoner. Awakening in darkness, Viktor woke up feeling a metallic taste in his mouth. The smell of damp and rust filled his nostrils. He tried to move, but chains bound his wrists. I was in a dark cell, in some prison camp. The war didn't kill him, but it didn't free him either. He looked up at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of reality. Anna was safe. This needed to be enough. But then, a doubt crept into his mind. What if she believed he was dead? What if she never knew he survived? The idea terrified him more than any gun pointed at his head. The days became weeks. The weeks turned into months. The war was coming to an end, and the prisoners were treated like ghosts, forgotten among the ruins of a world that was trying to rebuild itself. But Viktor never forgot Anna. Every night, every silent moment, he thought of her. Would she be safe? Would I have found a place to live? Or would she have spent the rest of her days waiting for him, not knowing if he was dead or alive? He needed to find her. But as his body was weak, your mind worn out, but your promise, This one was still intact. At the end of a harsh winter, prisoners began to be released. The field where Viktor was taken over by Allied soldiers, and the gates finally opened. He was free. But freedom meant little without Anna. He staggered off the field, the biting wind hitting his face. There was nowhere to go. I didn't know where to start. All he had was her memory. And so, he decided he would find her, even if it took a lifetime. Not even if fate tried to separate them again. I wouldn't rest until I saw her once more. Time had passed, but for Viktor, the clock of life had stopped the moment he saw Anna leave on that train. The world around him was trying to rebuild itself. Cities were rising from the ashes of war, but inside him, nothing was whole. Only one promise still kept him standing. He needed to find her. The months that followed were a blur of failed attempts. Viktor traveled between refugee camps, asking names, describing Anna's face, holding the only photograph he had of her, a worn piece of paper that he carried as if it were his own soul. Have you ever heard of a woman named Anna? She was on that last train. Did you see her? But the war had scattered people like leaves in the wind. Nobody knew. Nobody had answers. And doubt began to grow within him like a shadow. What if she was dead? What if he was looking for a ghost? But even so, he didn't stop, because as long as I was alive, she would also live inside him. In a reconstructed village, Viktor found an elderly woman who survived the same train that took Anna. She looked at him, surprised, when he mentioned the name. Anna. Yes, I remember her. Viktor's heart skipped a beat. Is she alive? Where is she? The woman sighed, her eyes full of stories that couldn't be told in words. She survived, but lost a lot. Viktor felt a lump tighten in his throat. She is fine. The woman hesitated. She never believed he survived. It was like a punch in the chest. Time seemed to stop. Anna believed he was dead. The woman touched his shoulder, her voice softer now. But she never forgot you. And then, she gave him the final missing piece. She's in Paris. He works in a bookstore in the Montmartre neighborhood. Viktor's heart almost stopped. She was alive, and he would go to her. Paris was unlike anything Viktor had ever seen. The streets were full of life. People were smiling. Musicians played happy songs in the cafes. But Viktor didn't see any of that. His heart was racing. His entire body was on alert. Why, Anna was there, and he was about to see her again. The bookstore was on a narrow street, hidden between old buildings. The smell of old books and fresh coffee wafted through the half-open door. Viktor stopped at the entrance, feeling the weight of everything he had experienced fall on him. Then he saw her. She was there, behind the counter, organizing books, with the same dreamy look he remembered. His hair was a little shorter. His face bore the marks of time and pain. But it was her. His heart felt like it was about to explode. He took a step into the store, and the doorbell rang softly. Anna looked up, distracted. Then, her eyes met his. And for a moment, the world stopped. Viktor didn't know if he was breathing. He didn't know if it was real. But then, he saw Anna's eyes fill with tears. The books she was holding fell to the floor. Her lips parted, as if she was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. And then, in a whisper, she said, "Viktor." He smiled, feeling teary-eyed. "I said I would never leave you." And at that moment, all the pain of war disappeared, because the love that resisted the bombs also resisted fate. For a moment, Viktor and Anna, they just looked at each other, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Time seemed to have stopped. The war, the pain, the scars of the past. Everything disappeared in that instant. They were there. Together, Viktor took a step forward. Anna remained motionless, as if she feared he was just an illusion, a ghost from the past. But he wasn't. He was there, for real. With tears in her eyes, Anna brought her hand to his face, feeling his skin, his features, as if she needed to make sure he was real. "I thought I lost you." His voice was shaky. Viktor closed his eyes for a second, taking in that touch, that voice he feared he would never hear again. "I never stopped looking for you." Anna's silent sobs turned into tears of relief. And then, without thinking, she hugged him. It was a hug that carried years of pain, longing, and unwavering love. Viktor held Anna as if he was afraid she would disappear, as if he let go, fate could rip her away from him again. "I waited so long for you," she whispered against his chest. He closed his eyes, smelling her hair, the heat of her body against his. "I said I would come back. To you." And at that moment, all the promises broken by the war were rebuilt. The following days were a blur of memories and stories that needed to be told. Anna told Viktor how she survived after the train left, how she was taken to a refugee camp and then found her way to Paris. Viktor told her about the years of captivity, about how he never gave up, about every place he asked for her. Every night he whispered her name in the darkness. The war had tried to separate them, but, against all odds, love won. Paris was under reconstruction, just like them. The past had left deep scars, but here, in the soft light of the cafes and the cobblestone streets, they started again. Viktor got a small job in a workshop. Anna remained in the bookstore, and together, day after day, they rebuilt not only their lives, but your love, because the love that resisted the bombs also resisted fate. On a cold autumn afternoon, Viktor and Anna walked hand in hand through Montmartre. The golden sun painted the city in soft tones, and for the first time in a long time, they were at peace. Anna stopped and looked at Viktor, her gaze shining with something he recognized: hope. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, smiling. He shook her hand. "Whatever we want," she smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. They had been through everything, and now, the future belonged to them. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every pain, every separation, and every reunion, as if it were your own, then you know that some stories should never be forgotten. The war tried to destroy everything, but Viktor and Anna showed us that love can resist even bombs, time and fate. And how many stories like this haven't been told yet? The past is full of loves that defied war, struggles for survival, and promises that resonate to this day. So, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications, because, in the next video, we'll bring you another story that will stir your soul and prove that, even in the darkest times, there is always something to fight for. Leave your like, share this story, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe that destiny can be challenged? See you in the next video, because some stories should never be forgotten.